How's it going, everybody? My name is Lee Woodmansee, and I'm the campus minister here at the Baptist Collegiate Ministry at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. Right now, you're catching us in the middle of episode 33 of The Link. The Link is a podcast that is designed to get students here at UA Fort Smith connected with one of three things. The first thing is topics of theology and the practical outworking of that theology, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The second thing is we want to get students connected with pastors and staff and churches in the area. And the third thing is we want to get students connected with believers who are on faculty or staff here at the university. And so today I'm going to be joined by somebody that's very special to me. We're going to be talking about a category of theological and practical necessity, frankly, that college students are just going to need to talk about. And I am thankful that I'm going to be joined by somebody that I have gladly been able to say has been someone who has discipled me and mentored me for 15 years or so at this point. I worked for this man whenever I was on staff at the BCM in Fayetteville. He actually was one of the two men who did my and my wife's wedding, and that is none other than the Right Reverend Dr. Lynn Loyd. Lynn, how are you, sir?
Oh, Lee, I'm doing good. Thank you for the opportunity to get to be with you. I've loved and enjoyed watching you develop this part of your ministry, and so thanks for the opportunity.
Well, it just happened overnight. No big deal. We just did it, put it together, just kind of, throw some, lights up in here. It just kind of happens.
Yeah,
it just
happened.
comes about.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Rock on. Well, none of that is true.
Yes.
This is all hard fought, and we're still figuring this stuff out. So we're glad you guys are sticking around. So, Lynn, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your ministry. Okay. Tell us about all that good jazz and what we need to know.
Yes. As crazy as this is, Lee, I've been in collegiate ministry now 40 years.
That's a little bit
40
of time.
plus
That's
years.
A little bit of time.
I know. And originally from Oklahoma, came to Arkansas, never dreaming that I would be here this long. But God has allowed us and provided us a place to serve Him through the Arkansas Baptist State Convention, doing collegiate ministry, which I have felt called to minister and reach college students, and so what a privilege that's been. I'm married, and we have 5 children, and we are a blended family. Unfortunately, I lost a spouse almost 20 years ago now, and remarried to Rebecca. And Rebecca had 2 daughters, and I had 2 daughters and a son. So we've got 5 children and 13 grandchildren at this point, and just a ton of life experience going on.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever knew this or not, but Jesse, your son, me and Jesse, we worked at Camp War Eagle together. He was the first guy that they threw me in a cabin with because he knew what was going on and I didn't. So that was my freshman year. After my freshman year in the summer, it literally wasn't until the spring semester, like halfway through the spring semester, because Jesse was involved. He actually helped lead worship at the BCM at the time, played bass. It wasn't until halfway through the semester that I put together Lynn is Jesse's dad. Like, it took me literally 9 months before I really started putting that together. And we were playing basketball at First Baptist Fayetteville, and he called you dad, and I'm like, what? It finally dawned on me. I felt like such an idiot there. So, rock on. So, with that being said, clearly you spent most of your time in Fayetteville, because that's where I had any of my interactions with you. So, where all did you do ministry before? From Oklahoma, South Arkansas? Tell us a little bit about your path to ministry and what it is that you actually do now.
Right. And mercy, it was one of those issues for me as growing up in a I don't want to say non-Christian family, but a non-churched family, and getting involved in church, in the church youth group, and then feeling like God had some purpose for my life and really struggling through that purpose. But as I went to college, got involved with Baptist Student Union, BSU, BCM.
Same.
And through the course of that time, God began to develop and put influential people in my life that helped me develop a heart toward ministry. And so I ended up doing youth ministry in some very part-time roles, small churches which eventually led to a larger church, which led to me getting involved in collegiate ministry as a youth minister / collegiate pastor, which then led me to seminary. And then we started into ministry, collegiate ministry, in 1980. Oh my!
It's got a different ring when you hear it said, right?
At Southern Arkansas University, Magnolia. Never heard of Magnolia. Never ever dreamed of living in Arkansas. But
and for those who are ignorant, what is the mascot of the SAU?
Mule Riders.
The Mule Riders,
yes,
baby. If you didn't know that, now you know.
I was a proud mule rider, let me tell you. So we, my first wife Cindy and I, that was our first place of ministry together as far as collegiate ministry. And 2 of our daughters were born in Magnolia. We were there 4 years and then they asked us to move to Fayetteville to work at the University of Arkansas, BCM. And
then you stuck in Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas, for the last 36 years, 35 years or so. Gotcha. So to be precise, how long were you the campus minister, director, same position, there at the BCM in Fayetteville?
Yeah, 29 years in Fayetteville, and then transitioned to a role of helping our campus ministers across the state.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that the last several years.
Yeah. And for those of you who didn't know, Cole Pinnock is presently the campus minister at the BCM in Fayetteville. And I'll just link up here to a couple of videos that we shot with him. But Lynn was only the second campus minister, director, that position in Fayetteville at the BCM ever, correct?
Oh,
is that right? Because you had Jamie Jones before you, and then...
But there was, the BCM started at the U of A in 1933 by a lady who then went to the mission field in Africa. Okay. And so there was, I don't know exactly how many campus ministers there were, but for the last
65 years?
Yes.
Right?
There's been only 2, 3. Counting Cole.
Yeah. And so part of the reason that I bring that up is partly just for, just encouragement to you that like the lineage of people that I've seen in college ministry is not the guy who's there for 4 or 5 years and then bounces. The lineage I have is guys like Steve Moore, who's involved with college ministry for 30 plus years. Yep. Josh Malden, who is still at First Baptist Fayetteville for like the 13th year or 12th year at this point, and then you at the BCM for almost 30 solid years. That's one reason why I say I very seriously doubt that I'll ever leave doing college ministries, because that's the example that I have is from men like you. So just as an encouragement, that's been one of the impacts on my life just from observing you.
Well, I really think I was fortunate to be able to stay in one place for so long, blessed. And then I was so arrogant to think when I first went there that, give me 4 or 5 years, we'll have this ministry turned around and it'll just be exploding. And after my first 10 years, I was going, Lord, please let me stay. I'm not finished. And after 29 years, I walked away from there going, Lord, I'm still not finished. The college ministry and the investment in collegians and students' lives is just a never-ending need and process. It is so strategic, as you know. And it's a privilege to get to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I endorse that wholeheartedly. Well, so all that being said, we've kind of got our background information. We got your bona fides out the way so people can trust you. Oh, there was one other question. What degrees do you hold? Because I called you Dr. Lynn Loyd, which not many people know, but it's, the cat's out of the bag now.
Yeah, well, I went to school in Oklahoma, small state school called East Central University, and I graduated with a degree in a bachelor's of science in medical technology. At that point, I was thinking...
That's back when they still use square needles, right?
Yeah. And a chisel. Yes. So my thought and plan was that I finally, after many struggles and changes of majors, I felt like I just wanted to do something that I thought had good purpose, where I could serve, where I could help people. And what was happening at the same time was I was a youth minister in a little rural church on the weekends. And I got to the place after I graduated, had a great job, living at home,
Good to go.
making some money. And I loved what I was doing on the weekends more than what I was doing during the week. And that's when I started praying about going and doing it full time, which led to a job at a First Baptist Church, Alva, Oklahoma. And from First Alva is where I sensed the calling to collegiate ministry, and left there to go to Southwestern Seminary, where I got a master's. Then it was called a master's in religious education with an emphasis in youth. And so I finished that degree, and I moved from Southwestern to Arkansas. I was also on a church staff back doing youth and music. But when I finished my degree there, we moved to Arkansas, and then ended up at the University of Arkansas. And as a part of just trying to re-educate myself, was looking at different doctoral programs to get involved with. And actually, one of the men that I met who had been on the mission field, who had come back, said, "Hey, why don't you think about doing this?" Because my thoughts were, well, what if this gig of being collegiate minister ever plays out? What am I going to do?
29 years later.
Yeah. So I was thinking, well, to stay in a collegiate ministry role, I would roll into maybe a position at a college as an administrator, vice president, a dean, or something like that. So I pursued my doctorate in education, adult education. And Rebecca, my wife, laughs at me because she says, "You're a doctorate that
Can't do
can't
anything."
doctor. You don't doctor."
Yeah.
But the incredible thing, it has opened, just that having that doctor in front of my name sometimes has opened incredible doors, especially on the mission field, on campuses. When we've gone on campus, it's been amazing when they find out, or I introduce myself as, I have a doctorate degree in education. The doors that it's opened on those campuses has been amazing. But yeah, those are my 3 degrees.
There you go. And just to be clear, like, that's not what we even have your name as
Right.
here, because that's just not that's not the persona you need to adapt.
Nope.
And frankly, I think I had almost graduated, I think, before I found out that you had a doctorate, because it's not something that you surround with pomp and circumstance.
Yeah.
You use it when it's necessary, and then when not, it's just Lynn.
Yep.
Rock on. All right.
Yeah.
So we are going to be talking about marriage and singleness and all that good jazz. So let me just ask you one question, a little bit more abstract, that I think might be a good primer for us. Why am I talking to you about this? Like, what experience do you gain from having done college ministry? Like, why is it that we should listen to what you got to say about this, either personally, professionally, whatever? Why should we be listening to Lynn Loyd right now?
Well, Lee, I asked myself that same question a couple of times, even on the drive down here. I'm going, Lord, why am I talking about dating at this point? But mostly because you and I, we get to be a part of students' lives when they are making some of the most important decisions of their life. They are in the process of determining who they are right now. These college years helps them reshape who they are, their identity, but then also what they're going to do. They're here to learn, hopefully get an education, a skill that they're going to take forward, and they may bounce, like me, with a degree in medical technology. I bounced from that, but that lays the platform for what they're going to do possibly for the rest of their life. But the third big decision that they're going to make is who they're going to do that with. And so while we get to work with these students, we get to see them develop relationships, intimate relationships, relationships that are going to affect the rest of their lives, and will change their life, maybe change the course of the direction of their life. And it is, this period of time is so crucial that these students, especially students that are, you know, when we get them, they come with all sorts of, I don't want to say baggage, but background experience. They may have come from a horrible family, or seen, you know, a divorced family, or they may have come from a good family. And so we get a whole mixed bag in helping some of them work through these issues, because we believe, you know, that there is there's purpose and direction behind marriage and calling. And so this is one of the biggest, most important decisions they are ever going to make in their life. And so to stay current and try to help students know and perceive and make good decisions in dating and marriage, it really is a part of our calling and discipleship.
Yeah, I mean, it's part and parcel of the conversations that I have on a monthly basis, if
Yes.
not weekly.
Yep.
You've experienced that over the last
Yeah.
3 decades with working with college students. I mean,
Yeah.
it's part of the warp and the woof of college students and
Yeah.
college
Yeah.
life. And if that's true, that means that we can screw it up pretty easily.
Oh, man.
If that's something that we're going to encounter so frequently as students, if they're going to encounter it that frequently, then man, it's just statistically, we're likely to mess it up at some point.
Yes.
So here's the first question that I want to frame as far as like the conversation about singleness and marriage. Here it is. What's the most difficult thing about being single?
Oh.
If we frequently mess this up, there's probably a reason for that. And I would say it's because being single is something that's hard.
Yeah.
But what makes it so hard is the first part of the question I want to ask you.
Yeah. And I'm going to be pretty candid with this, and especially with me personally, because I waited till I was like 26, 27 to get married. And then I was single again. And without a doubt, the most difficult thing about being single is loneliness. You know, God said it's not good for man to be alone. And man, loneliness will drive you to do things that you never thought you would do. And so, and his plan was for us not to be lonely. I mean, even when Adam was in the garden, he wasn't alone. I mean, he had all these animals. He even had God. But still, you know, God looked at him and said, man, it's not good for you to be alone. And he said, I'm going to create for you, develop a suitable helper. And so this issue of loneliness, that missing part of us that helps us be who we are and who we should be, is I think, and was the most challenging thing for me, was just the loneliness that came.
Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of beneficial for us to kind of keep in context here is that a lot of the things you just said there, we are going to root every bit of our understanding at some point of marriage and singleness back to creation. So we're going to be talking about the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And so I'll link up here in the description or in the cards. There's going to be a video in there about whenever we talk about Eve. And the word that gets used for Eve in Genesis is that she is the Azer, is the Hebrew word. And that word means helper, but it really means the indispensable helper, the indispensable other, that Adam had to have Eve in order to actually do the thing that God told him to do. Be fruitful and multiply. Ain't gonna happen with just Adam. And so there's more to this conversation than frankly we're going to be able to get to here. But I think everything that we're going to come back around to at some level is going to be rooted in Genesis 1 and 2, in how the created order of things was established, not by us and not by our desires, but rather by God. So let's take a little bit of a quick detour here then, and let's ask this. What does that loneliness point to? If God has created us in such a way that it is not good for man to be alone, well, then let's put that positively. What did he create us for, and how does that intersect with singleness in the sense of what can we learn about how God created us by what we feel when we are single? Does the question make sense?
Yes. In the there's two or three thoughts rolling around in my mind, but mainly it drives us to be dependent on Him.
Gotcha.
The dependence of not because what happens when, and I'm going to speak from probably a guy's perspective, when a guy's lonely, he's going to start on his own, seeking out things to fulfill that loneliness, replace that loneliness, and so if we're not careful, we will put that back on us and not on God, and lean into Him more. Are we going to lean in and trust Him for where He's taking us, even in this singleness season? And if we're not careful, we will become a hunter or a seeker after something or someone to fill that loneliness, and it kind of begins a chase. We'll chase this person, or we might chase this person, and so that is basically my thought on that.
Yeah, I think one thing that is beneficial here, and it applies in a whole lot of other ways, but my pastor in Louisville, Kentucky, Bill Cook, the way he always defines sin is any sin is when you fulfill a God-given desire in a God-forbidden way. So if you are fulfilling a God-given desire, well, then let's identify what that desire is. I'm only not being lonely, intimacy, community, whatever word we want to put in there.
Yeah.
Like God has created us with that desire. Therefore, that desire at some level is good. Now, what we do with it can be good, bad, or indifferent. But the desire itself was something that God gave us. And so whenever you survey in 1 Corinthians 7, you see Paul talk about singleness as like a blessing. Is it your assessment that most college students look at singleness as a blessing? Yes or no? I guess it's kind of like the answer, because I know my answer is
no.
No, not at all. So why do you think that is? Why is it that we look at singleness as something to be corrected or to be fixed at its earliest convenience?
Yeah, well, I think it's culture. We live in a culture that makes you think that something's wrong with you or with us if we're single, and that is so unfortunate. Even there's so many different now matchmaker kind of websites to go to figure out, let us match you with this person,
because clearly not being matched is the problem to be fixed.
Right. Even Hallmark, every scenario with Hallmark is about, two possibly broken people, getting together, in a Christmas romantic situation. And I hate to admit that I've watched some Hallmark movies over Christmas.
Is it because you wanted to, or is it because you and Rebecca wanted to?
Me and Rebecca.
Okay, throw her under the bus. Rebecca wanted to. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
She is a Hallmark person.
So is my wife.
Yeah. And so our culture just drives us that way. Is kind of the short, uncomplicated. Everything pushes us that way. So
if we're already starting to untangle that, clearly there's this blessing from God that singleness is, and when we try to replace it or we try to fix it, we try to correct it because we don't see it as a blessing. Let's just ask the simple question then why do we mess it up? Like, why do we not perceive it as a a blessing. Yes, culture tells us, well, you need to get married. Like that's just
Yeah.
kind of the expected thing.
Yeah.
I think something that we could wrongly point to as a problem for why we mess it up would be because we're just immature, because we don't know what we're doing, because we have a lack of experience in dealing with dating and marriage and those types of things. That's the reason we mess singleness up. Is that your read on things, or is there another reason that lies behind it from there?
Well, I've thought about that, and I'm going to go back to your reasoning about a maturity issue. I think I think there's a couple of things at play, and I do think it's a maturity, growth, discipleship kind of issue. I rarely do, and for the most part, in my mind, I'm thinking of 3 or 4 young ladies who are single, yet their desire would not be to be single. They would love to have a mate, a soulmate, even be married, and so it takes some time, and it's cyclical. Because what I've seen is that there are times when, I'm okay to be single.
Mm-hmm.
I love the fact that I don't, my concerns are limited.
Mm-hmm.
My considerations about my world are limited because I'm single. I don't have to be worried about this person or that person, so there's definitely advantages to being single. But for some reason, we will cycle through that and get to the bottom of, oh man, why am I
Almost
single?
despair.
Yes, you hit that despair, and then you have to work back through that. And so what I've seen, and it's the smaller that cycle gets, I guess, is a way of working, talking ourselves or working our way, or having people that are working with us, encouraging us in our singleness of where we're at in this season, because sometimes, well, unfortunately, there are some of those folks that come out of that singleness and will marry into situations too early,
Out of desperation or some other thing. Yeah.
Yes, and so going back to your question, yes, it is I think definitely a maturity kind of issue.
Yeah. But I think even then we would both put kind of qualifiers on what we mean by the maturity. Because in one sense, it's just a maturity of like, you've never dated before. And therefore, that first step out of singleness might seem kind of awkward and hard.
Yeah.
But there's also the other kind of maturity of just spiritual maturity in general, where we're talking about 1 Corinthians 7,
Right.
where Paul says this is from the Lord, and
Yes.
seeing it as a blessing. That's a whole different kind of maturity.
Right.
I think far too often we assume it's that first kind of maturity of that I've just never dated before, and that's why this is difficult. And I don't think that's actually the reason why we find singleness difficult. I think it's because of the second kind of maturity of just overall spiritual maturity of seeing God's provision for you at every stage that you're in.
Yes.
And that's really the root that I think in many ways.
Yep.
I also think we could have this conversation about this one thing for the next 45 minutes. But for the sake of time, let's move on, and let me ask you this question, because you kind of mentioned it earlier about helping people close that loop, and so that they arrive at a place of maturity. What are some helpful or unhelpful comments that people can make when we're trying to be encouraging, that we try to encourage somebody, but we just screw it up?
Yeah.
Like, in your experience, what are some of those things that you've heard people say that were good or bad?
Yes, and well, sometimes it just doesn't help. Even when you tell somebody, well, this is God's plan for you, Oh my, because that even a spiritual answer like that would, well, I don't like that plan. We got to get a different plan.
You're right.
Or you just need to wait for that special someone, or you just haven't found the right person yet. Those are the kind of unfortunate, and I'm not, that when we probably need to be saying, God's really at work here in your life, building you to be the person that you need to be, not just for someone that's coming along, but for who you need to be in the image of Christ. So there's a lot of mistakes that happen when we're talking to someone who is struggling through this season of being single, and sometimes we're not careful in our wording of what we're trying to say.
I think we've all fallen into that one way or another, like in our attempt to encourage somebody to see even God's design, we might just screw it up. One of the things that I think I hear a lot is that people would say, oh, well, once you are content with your relationship with God, that's when you'll get married.
Yes.
And that makes it seem as though the goal is to get married and the means are being content. Not be content with your relationship with God first and foremost. Bar none, no exception. That's all there is. And then whatever other blessing God might give you. We've actually just reversed it. And that sounds incredibly mature and sounds spiritual, but I think it just reverses that order of recognizing what it is that God has given us. And so what would be the helpful way to phrase that then? Because I could see us saying, okay, well, if the issue is don't make the relationship or the marriage that's possibly going to come, don't make that the end goal, make the relationship with God the end goal. Well, how do we do that in a good way in your estimation? How can we phrase that so that it is helpful and not unhelpful?
Man, Lee, I wish I was better at phrasing some of those things, and I'm in my mind. I'm circling back through different conversations that I've had, and the crazy thing is I've had more of those conversations with single ladies, single girls, than I have had with single men, and it may be because men have more of the choice of whether they're going to date or they're going to pursue. They're more in control of
initiating, at least.
And I was trying to. There were two different particular instances that I wish I wasn't so vague on. I wish I'd thought through this more about how they saw their relationship in singleness, and these are with ladies that would be older at this point. And I'm failing to come up with the words that I want to say of best how they expressed themselves. But it was in relationship. It goes back to this relationship of depending on a heavenly Father and seeing God as a Father and relying on Him and not man's, and when I say man in general, our world's viewpoint, our cultural worldview that would put the pressure on there must be something wrong with you if you're single.
Right.
But on the other side of things, it was, no, God has created me. He's given me opportunity beyond measure because I have this opportunity, because I am single, to do things that I couldn't do if I was married.
Yeah, I think, not to cut you off there, but I think in many ways, what I take away from that is that even if I struggle with articulating that truth, like, it can be articulated. There are people that do it well, and that is possible. If nothing else, I think that's encouraging to be able to say that, like, you're not just stuck with this lot in life. Like, that's not God's design for how you're to enjoy this time. Like, but there is encouragement to be found in pursuing relationship with God above anything else.
Yes.
And then, through that relationship, there's other blessing that comes along, and it might be singleness, it might be something else, but either way, it's God's blessing.
Yeah.
And I think that might be a beneficial way to kind of nail down, it can be done, to be encouraging in this time. Yeah.
Yes.
whether or not we are articulate enough to actually add that in there.
Yeah.
So I want to throw this in there. This
Yes.
episode is going to be airing on February 11th.
Oh.
So it's going to be coming out right before Valentine's Day. And right
Yes.
now it's a month before in January. But here's a question that you will see floated around, it just in Hallmark. Otherwise, people, whatever. And this is normally a question you get if you do a series on relationships at a BCM. And it's formulated in different ways, but here's the next question that I have for you. It's the classic question. How do I know when I've met the one?
The one.
How do I know when I've met the person I'm supposed to marry? There's clearly a set of guidelines and markers that everyone sees and responds to, and that it's just clearly known to everyone except the two people that are working through this. So tell us what those markers are, please, because how do you know when you've met the one?
When you've met the one, yeah. And meeting the one is definitely a process.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes, in my experience with Rebecca, was caught me totally off guard. I wasn't looking to date. I wasn't looking for a relationship. And my first chance encounter with her was one of those that caught my attention. But so
Wasn't it at a turkey bowl?
it
a
was
football game?
at a flag football game. Yeah, it's just I don't have time to go into all that story, but my first encounter with her was one that it really kind of caught me off guard. There are some things though, but that was just the beginning of this 3 or 4 year process to figure out that she was the one. Mm-hmm. So I think there are things on the front end that I would call the chase, that of being maybe either physically attracted, maybe first, but then there's this process of working that takes time. I wish there was an acrostic for time that would work into,
right. Which, by the way, just to be clear, I was being facetious when I said that there are clear guidestones, markers.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Right.
So I mean, like that's the humor of this is like you're trying to articulate a thing that's not concrete.
Yes.
Right. So
it is so, and that's why I call it the chase, because it is weaving back and forth, trying to figure out, is this the one? Mm-hmm. And there and within your single life, God may bring several people into your life that might be the one, mm-hmm. but it is a process of working through that to figure out, is this the one? And then at that point, when you make that commitment, that covenant with that person, they become the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as you can articulate,
yeah,
and because I would say this with me and Casey, it would be difficult for me to articulate at some level, as best you can. Instead of saying, how does somebody know that they have met the one? How did mm-hmm. you know that you had with Rebecca?
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Because that might be a little clarifying for us.
Oh man, yes, and it did take us a period of time, but I think you begin to recognize in this chase shared values and priorities to figure out that what Rebecca held as priority: family, her faith, her willingness to share Christ with people. Those were the things that I started discovering about her. Her cooking.
Yes, that's a fact. That's a fact.
That turned into a big thing for me. No, but just a unity of values and principles that as I began to figure out who she was, character. Certainly she was attractive and
which matters.
Yes, which definitely matters. But as I understood her character and was attracted to her character and her friendship, So all these things started to weave into a process of helping me understand, wow, we are similar. We have some shared things in common that are very, very important. And this started narrowing, down that funnel of, wow, this could be a real possibility.
Gotcha. I think one of the things that I try to communicate with students a lot is when it comes to dating and what that process is for. I don't think dating is the time where you discover if this is the person that you're supposed to marry. I think dating is the time to discover if she is the kind of person you
Yes.
can marry. And that's what we're talking about, these markers here.
Yeah.
And so there are some clear biblical requirements for someone who's going to enter into marriage for
Yes.
men and for women. And what I like to say is that unless that person shows the capacity to do those things, then they shouldn't be on the list.
Right.
And then you end the dating relationship. But if they show the capacity, like that just means that they're a possibility in that regard. And which I think that really kind of brings in to the next question, because you had talked about like we're kind of narrowing down the funnel.
Yeah.
We're bringing in like the less numerous opportunities or possibilities. So let me just ask like the follow-up question I think a lot of times we fail to ask, but that we kind of assume one answer or another. Is there a biblical idea that says that for each person, each man, each woman, there is one other person that they are meant to marry, and that's the only possibility? Is that how we see that being portrayed in Scripture? Is that how we see that being portrayed in practical outworking? To ask it another way, is there really only one person that you can marry in life?
Lee, my experience is definitely not. That I think that he brings into, and I'm going to go back to this funnel idea, there may be within your relationship group, several young ladies that, just like you said, this is what dating does. It helps you determine who you like, and how alike you are. And so there may be within that grouping several young ladies, speaking from a perspective that might potentially be that mate for you for a long time. But the narrowing process that we have to go through is what brings us down to that ideal, hopefully that the best idea, the ideal person, the best choice that we can make for that.
And that's a discerning process.
It is a very
which
much
could be
a
something
discerning process.
Could be difficult, but let me just make explicit another reason why we wanted you on this podcast is even that question is, well, if there is only one person that you're meant to marry, well, sorry, Lynn Loyd, you just screwed it up for somebody, right?
Yes.
Like, I just don't think that's how this works, right? I mean, I think God in His grace is far more gracious than we expect, frankly. But also, like, there's just these allowances for how life works. And frankly, we've already talked about how there's a lack of maturity for us, either spiritually on the whole or just in this arena. That means it's just kind of fraught with peril. Well, man, if that's true, then I think that God is gracious to overcome any shortcomings that we may have. So I'm with you. I would reject the notion that there is one soulmate.
Right.
And man, if you mess that up, sorry. Like, you got to stay married to that person, but that, that's just, you should have picked better. Like, no, I don't think that that's how this works. Anything you want to add to that part of the question?
No, I don't think so. I just know that now that I have chosen, I have the person that is, I'm going to throw everything into this relationship. I'm throwing everything into this ring. I'm throwing everything toward this marriage that I have with Rebecca, because she is the one.
Right.
So, but that's my only thought.
No, I think that's beneficial to hear. So here's the next question I want to ask. And I think this one is, we could get really in the weeds and it could be difficult to answer, but I also think there could be a fairly easy answer, but I want to pick your brain on this. Whenever we get to that point of like, okay, I feel like I found out this is the one. how do I know when I'm ready for marriage? How do I know when I am ready? Because I may have identified, hey, this person, we're going to get married, but that might be 3 years from now.
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm married, ready for marriage right now? What do you tell students whenever they're asking you that question?
Yeah.
What are the markers you look for there?
Yeah. Again, I think there's some really good markers. One is, and it still goes back to time. How much time have you allowed to really get to know this person? Are there are the people that surround you, family and friends, that observe you, are they welcome to observe you and say, hey, can they celebrate your relationship? Might be the way to say that, and say, oh man, Lee, I'm so excited for you. She is perfect for you. And hopefully, and you want them to be telling you the truth.
Right.
You would also want them to come to you and say, hey, here's a red flag.
Right.
I don't know if this is the right person for you. So hopefully there are those people, family and friends, that are willing to celebrate. One of the most heartbreaking stories that I've heard from someone is who married real young, right out of high school, is she said, I wished my dad would have told me not to marry him. I knew it was wrong. I shouldn't have married him, and we married anyway.
Yeah.
And so having those kind of people that are willing to speak into your life, a willingness to a clarity, even if this relationship is going to be 3 years long, being clarifying where you are in your relationship all the way long, and keeping the confusion out, so that she knows or he knows where you stand in this relationship. Where are we moving to in this relationship? I think that's super important, because unfortunately, what dating can do, it can just be so confusing because there's no clarity of where you are and where you're moving in the relationship. So I think that's part of the process that you're working through, is this. Yes, I know we have a plan. We're working toward this. We're sticking with it. And so clarity, there is an emotional maturity that needs to be growing. There is that kind of love that needs to be growing, that's not only a friendship kind of love or an erotic kind of love, but that agape type of love that's going to be sacrificial. Am I willing, and are we both willing to sacrifice for each other? Because marriage requires a lot of sacrifice. And so being able to know and see and understand and be involved in the process of, all right, I'm giving up some things for you, and she is giving up some things for me, that it just shows the kind of love that it's going to take to go the course of a lifetime, because that's what you're after. You're after this, when you work your way through this chase and you begin to really look, and for Rebecca and I, we came to a place where we knew that God was calling us into marriage. And I can't tell you how important, my first wife and I fell in love, started ministry together. But with Rebecca, it was more of a calling of, I clearly felt like God was calling me into this relationship, because there were things that I knew that he was going to use me in this family's life to reconstruct it. And I wish, that's a whole different story. But calling, it took me by surprise, I think, to understand what God was calling me into. And so when it got hard, because being in a blended family is hard, and you know that. And so if there are times when I have to go back and go, okay, God, if I understand that you've called me into this, because if I wasn't called into this, I would bail.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that hard. So part of this is understanding that you're called into this marriage.
Gotcha.
So,
And I think, just to make a clarifying question then,
Yeah.
would you say that if any of these things are not present, an unwillingness to sacrifice, there are people who are telling you, hey, there are red flags. If you see a certain set of qualities that aren't present or
Yes.
that they have the capacity for, if any of those things are not present or, just the negative response of that, that's the reason not to get married for you at that moment with that person. But even within that requires discernment. Yeah.
oh yes, yeah. You mentioned something there, character. You have to be attracted to character, and you've got to discern character. And bad character corrupts good company, and bad character attracts bad character. And so, when in this whole process of discernment, there's a lot of factors I think that you go through to discern at what level and at what level of commitment are we at today,
Right.
or next month, and that moves us toward matrimony.
Yep.
And so yes, to answer your question, you've got to be willing either to step back and say, man, this is not where we need to go. This is not the person that I need to be attached to for the rest of my life. Or do we need to get counseling? If this is, then that's where premarital counseling comes in a big way.
Even if your relationship up to that point has been great,
Yes.
you still need it because there are just unknown variables that are going to come down the pipe that you may be unaware of, but the
Yeah.
person doing the counseling absolutely sees coming
Yeah.
and is necessary.
Rebecca and I started premarital counseling before we were ever engaged.
Okay.
And it was very important for us to get into a situation where we had someone that could see both of us and say, man, here's your blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
And so we entered into that premarital counseling, and which led to engagement. I mean, it is what actually turned me and said, okay, it's time for me to put a ring on her finger.
There you go.
You know,
Rock on.
Yeah.
I didn't know that part of of y'all's courtship in
Yes.
that regard.
Yeah.
Well, I think that enters into like a really important question that I want to ask that is bridging everything you've said, but let's just bring a little more clarity to
Yeah.
it. Whenever you are approaching dating, when you're approaching from dating to engagement, whenever
Yeah.
you're approaching the wedding ceremony, there are certain kinds of conversation that are acceptable and things that you should be engaging in, and there are certain things and conversations that are just naturally going to change the closer you get into marriage and then in marriage. So you tell me, what are appropriate things that we as people who are mentoring students who are walking through this process that we should tell them at these various stages? This is appropriate conversation, but that is not for dating, for engagement, for the run up to engagement. Are there some clear markers for you of what is appropriate and what isn't, and then how do we kind of define that?
Yeah, I think that definitely conversations about purity early on to set some boundaries, that we're not, we're going to run along this track here with sexual purity. I think that conversation could be had up here, but it's probably not until you are engaged and ready to step into premarital counseling that you actually talk about sex. I think it is so helpful to have another couple mentor you that's going to talk to you about intimacy and sexual intimacy, even though you think you may know the biological parts of it, but there is such a whole different spectrum of romance and what the sex is in the marriage. And so I don't think
and
that,
frankly, spirituality as well.
Yes.
Like being one flesh.
yes.
Yeah.
And that conversation needs to come toward the end within the last 2 months, 6 weeks, maybe, of your relationship, single relationship there. Even joining some things together, like finances. Where do you have those financial? You don't want to join together in any kind of finances on this side of the relationship. But as you get closer, and again, it could be within when Rebecca and I do premarital counseling, we try to allow 10 to 12 weeks of being with this couple and walking them through these stages of figuring out financial budgeting, conflict management. You've got to make sure there are some systems in place, and maybe those systems already are starting to develop, but they need to be defined or maybe redefined, because maybe there's a lot of couples that have not had any conflict,
right, or conflict resolution. They haven't resolved it well.
Yes. And right up until the wedding day, and then there's conflict because of all the craziness that goes on with a wedding. And it's just like, oh, we'd never had a fight before, and then our wedding was horrible.
So maybe we shouldn't have done this. This is the first response.
Yeah.
It's like, well, maybe that's not the right answer. Maybe the right answer is we should have talked about this, or y'all should have talked about this before it became an issue.
Yes.
Like, it could be as simple as that.
Yeah.
But what you're saying there clearly is that there are those indicators, but how do we know when we've crossed from appropriate conversation to inappropriate conversation at different stages? Do you have any examples of, like, well, clearly we shouldn't be talking about sex and sexual preference and those types of things when dating, but that's much more appropriate later on. How do we know when we've crossed that line? Because and by the way, I envision in my mind the conversations that college students have at 3 a.m, wherever. They might be hanging out in a group, but they're kind of like by themselves having a conversation. And sometimes that can just be unwise. And I'm kind of placing these conversations happening in that place. So how do we know when we've crossed the threshold from appropriate conversation into inappropriate conversation?
Wow. Had a flashback of a couple that ended up eloping, I guess, and and part of the reason was, well, there were several reasons, but that when you cross from what's appropriate to inappropriate, unfortunately, you may not know till you look back.
Okay.
And so when you cross that line, if you have moved yourself toward intimacy, whether it's physical or emotional, that puts you on a whole different plane of oneness, one fleshness that you're not ready for. And how do you recognize that? Unfortunately, it comes on the backside of things. So I think what you have to do, again, and that's why premarital counseling is so important, I think. It kind of sets the tracks for some of the conversations that you're going to have in an appropriate setting. With some mentors.
Yeah, whether that's moderated with someone in the room,
yes,
they're at least guiding the process, even if they're not in part of the conversation when they have it back wherever.
Yeah. But
it's got those left and right ditches to kind of keep us on the path there, right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So I don't know if I've answered your question exactly.
I think that is the answer, and this kind of goes back to why it is that we find that this dating process is difficult, is because a lot of the experience that we gather and wisdom that we gain from those experiences is only found in hindsight.
Yes.
It's after we mess it up, or after we've seen somebody else mess it up, and then we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that's about as good an answer as we can get, given the fact that we find ourselves in relationships as people who are broken by sin with people who are broken by sin. That's just going to be the natural response, or natural result whenever you see a lack of experience and maturity in this area and spiritual maturity overall. I think that's just expected.
Right.
But to also recognize that there's still grace even in those situations. So one thing you've hit on more than one occasion, this will be like the last question we kind of like lay out as far as singleness and marriage, despite the fact we've gone all other places. Here's the last question I want to ask. What role do good role models play and good examples of marriage play in a couple's life as they are progressing through the stages of friendship, dating, engagement, and marriage? What role would you say this is what they should be playing? And here's what the benefit is from having those people who can speak into your life. How would you answer that?
Oh, man. I don't know that I can say with the utmost importance of good role models.
Right.
Good, and understanding that within that, even our best role models are flawed. And Lee, this is why I hold campus ministers up to such a high level. And this is part of the ministry that people in churches don't see, is the importance of college students observing the lives of their campus minister and their spouses. And they over and over again, of the number of people that we've done premarital counseling for, and couples that we've had in our home, it is, again, intentional. Like when I told you that we wanted to have at least 10 to 12 weeks, and every one of those meetings would be in our home, and they would culminate with a meal around our table, with sometimes children around the table, because we wanted them to see what it looked like for a family to try and sit down and eat a meal together.
Mashed potatoes in the hair with kids and everything.
Oh, all of that, and the chaos that comes, with raising children. And so so many of our students, we're the only role model marriage that they will be close enough, people will let them in close enough to see. Because being vulnerable and letting a couple in to see the flaws of your marriage is intimidating. How do we handle conflict? One of the reasons that I was so adamant about doing premarital counseling is that I knew that every time I did premarital counseling, it helped me and it helped Rebecca more probably than it helped the couple we were trying to counsel.
For no other reason. Let's just be selfish here and let me get better.
Yes. So let me help you work on your marriage so it'll help my marriage. And that is exactly right, because I had to go back over principles of, hey, this is the way we manage our money. This is the way we deal with conflict. This is the way we work together to raise our children. This is the way we try to put a budget together. This is the way I go to work and she goes to work, and we try to blend this together. And so I can't tell you how important it is that as a couple moves in the direction of marriage, that they get under the mentorship of a couple that they would trust, and a couple that would allow them to see their whole life.
Yeah, I think just to kind of clarify that, when we're talking about good examples, we're not talking about just with premarital. That the person you're doing premarital counseling with, that's whenever you need to have people close. No. You need to have people close who can observe your relationship. Going back to what you said, like, would you be embarrassed by telling them, like, hey, so-and-so and I are dating now, what do you think? And you're like, well, I don't know. Like, you don't want that response, but you want people who are close enough to have that, have that purview into your life. So I guess the last question I'll ask on this part is, well, then how do you identify those people? If you say that as campus ministers here at the BCM, in many cases we are the closest example that students have to a good marriage, what are some other good places they can look for to identify that's a good example to follow? Because I would put forward that maybe your parents' marriage is not the best
Right.
one, partly because you're just too close to the situation. You're bringing
Right.
a whole lot of other perspectives on that. But also, I mean, it may have been just a bad marriage, and we
Yeah.
wouldn't want that to be the example. So how do you identify good examples that you want to be speaking into your life?
Yeah, and just a thought of our 5 children, only one of our children and their spouses wanted us to do their premarital counseling.
Really?
Yes, and it was a lot of fun, but it was, yeah, it was challenging too. But so how do you identify one, and where do you find those couples?
Right.
For us, and one of the things that I would suggest is trying to find more than one couple that are at different places in their marriage down the road. You need somebody that you can talk to that's been married a year or two. You need somebody that you can talk to that's been married 10 years, 20 years, maybe 50 years. So for us, and Rebecca and I did this, we talked to several different couples. For us, we were looking for couples who were blended.
Similar experiences.
Yes. And so we talked, I 3, 5 different couples that we would go to and say, wow, we're thinking about this. What's your recommendation? How did y'all do this? And for us, because we fortunately had a network of several different churches, of people in several different churches that we knew, we were fortunate that we could find those couples within the Christian church community. And so I highly recommend that. And this is one of those things, going back to your relationship. I mean, if you're not both involved in a church together, then that's a red flag right there.
Yeah.
But so as you're working this together and you're involved in a church together and you've got this greater network, I would definitely be looking inside the church for a couple who has a Christian worldview and loves college students, isn't afraid to be vulnerable and share their lives with you.
Yeah, and I think, I'll even link it up here ahead. The conversation we had with Cole Pennick going through those episodes were how do you find and form good friendships in college? And one of the things we said is primarily at your church,
Yes.
but then also like how to join a church was a really critical issue. And that's one of the things that I think, I don't think you should join a church because of your dating potential there. Like,
Right.
no. But recognizing that the people that you're going to pull from, they're going to be these couples who can observe you, should come from that church in many ways, because they're the ones who are observing you. They have a clear line of sight into your relationship, but also everything else that's going on in the life around you there.
Yeah.
So, final shot as far as dating, marriage, singleness, that kind of jazz. If there was something that you had thought about that I didn't ask you and that you want to fly out now, let's go ahead and have that be the time for your final parting shot here as far as dating and marriage goes. What you got for us, if anything?
Yeah, I think one is I want to go back to the idea of calling into marriage, and to me, there's this chase that begins that kind of works into this calling that steps into commitment, different levels of commitment of yes, we're moving forward this, that leads to a covenant. And a covenant is so much different than a contract or a license or anything like that. It is setting down and saying, it's not saying, if you do this, I'll do that. That is not marriage. Marriage is a covenant that says, I promise I will do this.
Regardless.
And staying in that covenant. And so the last challenge would be, man, if you're going to make that kind of promise to someone, hopefully you have done all the homework, all the preparation to get to that place that says, regardless of what happens, I promise I will never leave you alone. I will be there for you.
Yeah, I think that's it's a great view to have on marriage, to recognize that whenever Paul in in Ephesians chapter 5 and later on in 6, when he's kind of bleeding over there, he doesn't look at marriage as, oh, by the way, that's kind of like what Jesus did for us. Like, no, he says that what Christ did for us is the picture that marriage follows, not the other way around.
Yes.
And so how did Christ love the church? Well, he died for her before she ever responded. How did he provide for her? He provided even whenever she was running away. How did he love her? And well, he took the initiative. And then as a husband, I import that meaning onto my covenantal relationship with my wife in the same way, that regardless of how she responds, I do X, Y, and Z. Not because, well, I said so, but no, because like that's a picture of the gospel, and that's a testament to our faithfulness to Christ in how we live in that regard. So I think that's might be our good, spot where we'll cut it off there.
That is word right there.
So here's what we always end with, and frankly, I don't even know what answer to expect from you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. The question we always end every podcast with is, I want to know what you're listening to, what songs, what albums, if there's anything new that's in your rotation, new sermons, new podcasts. What are you listening to right now that people might be able to get into?
Yes. Music-wise, I listen to KLRC,
which is
it's the radio station out of John Brown University, and Christian radio station that is always on, usually in our home, in our cars, and so it's just fluffy Christian radio.
So other than like the heavy hardcore metal that you listen to whenever Rebecca's not around, that's what you listen to?
Country. If I start listening to country music while I'm driving, it's going to end in a romantic night.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So for all the times that I've railed against country music, maybe I should give it a shot for that reason.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, y'all can do with that what you will.
Yeah.
We have on more than one occasion, either whoever I was interviewing or myself have railed against country music. And I have even gone so far to say is I think it should just be done away with, but maybe I should reconsider.
Oh,
right?
man.
Maybe I should reconsider. Do you listen to a lot of sermons or podcasts or anything like that? Do you have anybody in particular that you would say, hey, y'all need to listen to this?
Well, I tell you, especially for singles, The Porch out of Watermark Church in Dallas.
Okay.
Great. Very, I want to say, almost unbridled content toward singles. The Porch is something I try to keep up with occasionally.
Okay.
One of my favorite pastors is Stephen Smith, Emmanuel Little Rock, just a great teaching pastor. I've always said two of the three best speakers in the state of Arkansas are in Northwest Arkansas: Cole Pennick, Josh Malden, and Nick Floyd.
I would second all three of those.
Those are the three of the best communicators, bar none, in our state and beyond. And then I listened to Al Mohler's podcast. Briefing to kind of keep me up on world news and stuff. The
goings on.
Yeah. And so those are some of my favorite go-to things.
Gotcha. Well, we'll link down below to your favorite Swedish death metal band, and the Porch and everything else. We'll have all that down there. Well, Lynn, I just want to say thank you for being here and having this conversation. I mean, it's a little bit longer than what we normally have had, but I think it's one of these things that is beneficial. And I think we could even expand this conversation many times over when we get into the more specifics of that. But I guess that responsibility will fall to me, and we'll have that conversation with students as they bring up those issues. But yeah, any other parting shot? Last thing you want to say?
No, that's all right. I'm good.
Well, Lynn, thank you for being here. And we want to end the podcast with the phrase that we always end, and that's with our benediction of sorts. And that's by saying, do good and don't sin.
All right.